Rami Karabibar is the co-founder and CEO at EvenUp. Join us here as part of the Floor Talk series at the NYSE. It's great to have you, Rami. Thanks for taking the time.
It's great to be here.
Let's start with a bit of an introduction to EvenUp for any of our viewers a bit unfamiliar. What are you all about?
Yeah, so we started EvenUp 5 years ago, and it's to even up the playing field in personal injury cases. There's about 20 million claims every year in the US of folks that get injured, whether it's in motor vehicle accidents, dog bite cases, or any other type of injury. And the big problem that we're trying to solve is to even up the distribution of outcomes. So what I mean by that is you could take two very similar cases today, and one can settle for 500K, the other can settle for 50K. And ultimately what that means is the system is not as fair as it should be. And so our whole mission, even it up, and ultimately get these 20 million Americans the justice that they deserve.
And what does that look like in terms of actual follow through and practical application for all of these dense and otherwise pretty weedy legal cases?
Yeah, so we're a generative AI B2B SaaS startup, so we work with the attorneys that represent the folks that are injured, and we really help them across the life cycle of their cases. So what I mean by that is for these lawyers that we partner with, we draft legal letters on their behalf. We also help them understand the value of their cases, and ultimately the things that we really care about is how can we get these folks to settle their cases as fast as they can for the fair amount. The beauty of our system is we generally see a lot more cases than any individual attorney can on their own. So we're better able to say, for this case, this is the best way that you should potentially manage the case, what the outcome should be, and the more cases we see, the better the system gets.
Yeah, when we have this overall conversation about generative artificial intelligence and potential industries that could be disrupted, you frequently hear about disruption for the legal field. I wonder if in your process with your co-founders, has this taken a fair bit of convincing people in the legal field and attorneys to trust partnering with a great AI company like yours?
For sure, it matters a ton. The thing about law, a lot of folks say generative AI and legal tech are kind of shoe-ins for another because there's a lot of text that's part of this. Yeah. However, the thing that's really important in law is accuracy. You can't be 90% of the way there in a legal document that can get you disbarred as an attorney. And so the thing that's really important for a lot of our customers is how do we ensure that quality is there? Because 90% is not good enough, and 99% of the way is the way to go. So the way we've approached this problem is by ultimately building our own models that are fine-tuned to this space, so that when we see a case like this, or the raw case files, think of as medical records, medical bills, police reports, we get a meaningfully higher level of accuracy than a human can on their own.
And I imagine that's a really important part of the process, because as anyone who's even casually interacted with a large language model knows, hallucinations are there, mistakes get made, and to your point, it sounds like you don't have a lot of room for error.
That's right, yeah. And so the beauty of the way we've built this is there's much less hallucination risk when it's trained specifically on personal injury cases. And to put this into perspective, we see thousands of cases every week. That's more than any law firm in the US. It's about over 100,000 a year. And that's where, again, every case gets you that incremental basis point or percentage point of accuracy. That stuff really matters for our customers.
How do you expect that the relationship between the law field and generative AI will continue to evolve? And how do you most expect EvenUp to be uniquely positioned at that intersection?
It's a good question. We specifically operate in one part of law, which is the personal injury domain. And I can't speak for all legal. I think my first reaction is incentives really do matter across law. Think about our industry in personal injury is the attorneys that we work with, they operate on a contingency model. They make a percentage of the value of the claims that they manage. And so they are very incentivized for anything that can help them reduce time on desk or increase case outcomes, which makes them more of a shoe-in for generative AI. Now, when you're dealing with other types of attorneys that are billed hourly, the incentives are a little bit less clear. And so for us, we do want to stick in our lane and ultimately be able to continue on this path of really rapid growth, because it makes sense for us, it makes sense for our customers who are the law firms, and most importantly, it makes sense for the 20 million Americans that get injured at no fault of their own.
Yeah, of course, the millions of lawyers we have in the US know that ethical considerations to how they go about their business is so important, always has been since their days in law school. What does that ethical consideration look like for you and the company, knowing that so much of the work you do is partnered with lawyers and attorneys who similarly have to take into account those types of considerations?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, every one of our customers really cares ultimately about, again, their clients and obviously their own P&Ls given their contingency model. And the way I describe it is everybody kind of knows what the right answer should be, at least in our space. So I'll give you a stat just to kind of symbolize some of this. On the thousands of cases that we see every week, about on average, these cases are settled about 150 days later than they should. And so when you go to these law firms and you ask them about, hey, are you sending your cases on time? A lot of them will tell you we are not. because we're short-staffed. We don't have enough time to look through all of the cases that we have. And something that's important to keep into perspective for these law firms that we partner with, they're talking about 100 cases a year on average by attorney. And so it's really, really hard to be on top of that many cases. And so for us, when you have AI and you have software that you can ultimately give these folks capacity, and you can see real metric outcomes of settling cases sooner for the fair amount, that's what makes it an ethical, ethically positive, and makes sense for them and for their clients, because ultimately they're delivering a better service to their constituents.
Rami, what has most surprised you about the ways with which the legal world has warmed up to the idea of your company and the potentials for generative AI on their industry?
It's a crazy thing, right? Like when I think we were chatting a little bit about this earlier today, actually, but when we started our business 4 years ago, generative AI and legal tech were two negatives that did not make a positive. It actually made something that was way more negative. And so it's insane to see the amount of adoption and interest that's changed. And if you think of our customer base, a lot of these folks are in their 40s and their 50s. Most of these folks, to maybe half of them, haven't really used ChatGPT yet. So we're still in the early days of generative AI and tech adoption. But what makes generative AI a little bit different than what you typically see in software for law is when you're doing specific parts of a legal draft or something that's closer to their day-to-day work, it's a lot easier for them to evaluate it because they're much more familiar with the subject matter, right? If you're an attorney and you get a legal letter that you've been writing for 20 years and you get one that's generated by software, you don't really care if it's generated by software as long as it reads right and it is ultimately better than what they can do internally. That's what allows them to adopt really quickly versus going from like the on-prem to cloud and that type of transition, which they're like less familiar with because it's not in their day-to-day. That's where it takes longer to adopt. So we haven't seen as much of that in our space, surprisingly.
Absolutely. Rami Karabibar, it is great to have you here. Congratulations on all the success with you and your colleagues at EvenUp, and I appreciate a few minutes of your time today.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.